Hey guys, Yips here coming in with another video, and today we're going to do a Mythic Plus commentary for Warlock on the PTR. I took the time today to run a 15 Mists of Tenera Scythe, and I was able to get some pretty good results with Affliction, and I want to share them with you today. The build I was running was Drain Soul, Siphon Life, Sow the Seeds, Haunt, and Dark Soul Misery. I felt like this talent setup was very strong in the dungeon. You could run Writhe and Agony instead of Siphon Life to bolster your AoE DPS a little bit. However, I feel like Siphon is also a solid choice to add additional single target by way of giving your Malefic Rapture an additional dot. With the commandos, with the bosses, it definitely felt like it was a decent talent choice, so depending on the keystone, we could see Warlocks choosing between the two talents. However, obviously, Writhe and Agony does give you more overall AoE damage, and definitely will be used in dungeons like Halls of Atonement and so on. In terms of legendaries, I was using the Decaying Soul Satchel legendary on my feet. It was giving me haste and crit whenever I pressed my Soul Rot. However, I felt like I could have probably performed fairly similarly running something like Visions of Demonic Synergy. I think that the legendaries will be very close together on Mythic Plus, and I don't think you're going to hurt yourself too bad if you play Demonic Synergy instead of the Decaying Soul Satchel. So overall, Affliction performed very well. I want to show you guys the video, show you guys the amount of DPS I was able to do on some of the pulls, and overall I just felt like Affliction was very nice to play on the PTR. So let's just jump into it. So here we have a 15. A 15 on the PTR is slightly more difficult than on live because of the seasonal scaling. We were 226 item level in this video. I was favoring haste and mastery, and you're going to see just basically very similar ideas throughout this whole key. Ramping with agonies, ramping with pre-seeds, getting haunt, getting UA on my focus target, pressing my soul rot, and then spamming Seed of Corruption. And you can see here, as long as you have a good amount of targets, and as long as they're stacked, Sow the Seeds does excellent DPS. It is a killer in terms of AoE. On some of these pulls, the amount of AoE I was able to do was very comparable to the amount of AoE a Fire Mage could do on the similar amount of targets. So Warlock is definitely very, very strong when it comes to sustain AoE DPS. You have that 1 minute Soul Rot window where you're able to do huge DPS. Every 2 minutes you have your Dark Soul, you have your Dark Glare. You're able to do even more damage because you're extending your dots. You don't have to spend time reapplying them. You're extending your Soul Rot, which does big DPS. You're able to get additional haste from your Dark Soul, stacking that with your Soul Rot Decaying Soul Satchel, and your damage is very good. Now, the parts where Affliction did feel a little weak was as expected on some single targets encounters. However, I didn't feel like it was that bad. I didn't feel like on the single target that I was really falling behind compared to the rest of the group. Yes, I was lower, and yes, it wasn't as good, but I more than made up for it in those AoE scenarios, and I think that Aff is definitely going to be an extremely strong pick as we move into 9.1. So, in general, the things that you want to be thinking about when you move into a pack in Mythic Plus on how you want to play your AoE is how long is the pack going to live? Affliction is very much a spec that can pull resource and then do a bunch of damage at any given moment as long as you have the buttons available to you. You don't really lose damage by not spending soul shards. The only thing that you lose as a Warlock is if you're delaying your cooldowns to a point that they won't be up later. So you're kind of trying to play a game where you're min-maxing when is the best time to pop my cooldowns so I'm not waiting too long, but I'm also maximizing my ramp on the pack so I'm able to do enough damage overall. And then at the end of each pack, you want to make sure that you're prepped for the next one. So it's a little bit of a game that you have to play in terms of using your Dark Soul, using your Soul Rot, playing those two things together, just like it is on live, to where you want to maximize that ramp to where you're sort of peaking and able to spend all your shards before the pack dies. And it's a little bit of a game you have to play. You have to get comfortable with it. You have to get used to the group you're playing with, the key level, and so on and so forth. And the way I was playing this key is I was playing fairly rushed. I was saying, okay, I think the mobs are going to be dying fairly quickly on a 15 level of difficulty, so I'm going to play as if I need to get my damage off very quickly, and you'll see that more throughout the key as we get into more trash packs later on. So here we have one of the commandos. It's a single target type encounter. I'm doing reasonable DPS. I did commit my cooldowns to it. However, a lot of classes will commit their cooldowns to the commandos, and they are going to live a long time. So Warlock is definitely going to be okay at this seasonal affix, and I'll talk a little bit more about why in just a second. So one of the things that you're going to see groups trying to do is they're going to be trying to pull trash with commandos in Mythic Plus. And that means that a lot of these so-called single target encounters, as you start scaling the difficulty, as you're running with more competent and set groups, you're going to see Affliction Warlocks performing relatively better than they would in, say, a Pug scenario where you're just doing your weekly key and pulling these commandos solo, because you're able to get that multi-dot cleave, because you're pulling multiple mobs together, and you're not just kind of focusing on that weakness that AF has that is that single target. So I think as we see the meta progress and this season continue, we'll see trash being pulled with the commandos. We'll see Affliction Warlock doing more damage because of that. And I think that'll be a good thing for AF overall. Here we just have some standard 2-target cleave. This is where Siphon Life, is decent. I think Writhe is a little bit better on 2-target, but Siphon bolstering the damage of my Raptures, overall, I think a decent talent pick. And you'll see on this first boss, Affliction is still very competitive on single target, especially on bosses with vulnerabilities, and you'll see that when we get there. So, killing another one of these commandos again, I'm going to be saving my 2-minute cooldowns, I believe, for the boss, because I don't think that this guy will take me 2 minutes, and it won't take me 2 minutes to hit the vulnerability phase, so you can just see what AF looks like with no cooldowns. So, overall, yes, the single target really isn't that impressive, especially considering I have a 10% int buff from the mushroom. However, I pop my soul rot here, I'm going in with my raptures, and I'm doing alright. I mean, 5k, it's not bad. I'm almost keeping up with the rogue and the DH, which are two classes that aren't cooldown dependent. They do extremely good single target, regardless whether they have CDs up or not, because all of their damage buttons happen on such a short CD. The only thing that Demon Hunter really has is his hunt, and I don't know what Outlaw Rogues do, but they tend to always do good single target, so that's great. But I was able to keep up with them to a reasonable proportion. It wasn't too far behind, and we'll see. I'm just going to skip a little bit ahead on this 2-target boss fight, because it's really not that interesting, but you can see that when we get to this boss, and we get to this sort of single target burn phase, Affliction really isn't so bad, and we have to note that we don't have a Bloodlust in the group, so that would also further increase AF's overall DPS on a fight like this, because we scale, pretty well with haste, get more shards, get more damage, and all those things are very nice. And we end up 2-phasing the boss. I end up being, I believe, top DPS on him, so you can see Affliction still pretty decent on single target, at least on a fight like this. I mean, this fight is a little bit of an exception. It does have the vulnerability phase. It is a 2-target boss outside of that. Yes, that does play in Affliction Warlock's favor, but, we'll see later the kind of AoE damage that AF is doing, and you're like, dang, you can do some single target, but you can also do some big damn. Something I want to note about this new commander here is, I kind of thought about it when I saw it, is he charges and then does his AoE circle. So what I ended up doing was I put a port down, I put a gateway down later, and you can actually end up blinking or porting out of his charge, and you don't take the dots. So that's just something to think about as you move forward in Keystones to counteract this mob. He targets range with a AoE circle, and you can see here he charges, and I just poured out of it. I get bopped, however I didn't need to. You can just move out of it as he casts it. It's probably slow enough that you can even max range and just A or D key, strafe left or right out of it, no problem. So this guy really isn't so bad. So it's worth noting that two of the notable powers that I got were the Volcanic Plumage and the 8% additional haste buff that I got earlier on, and I'll be carrying those out through the rest of the Keystone. So those buffs definitely are very good. Everyone gets them though, so it's, class-wide, everyone gets them. However, getting the Plumage for Warlock kind of helps your single target more proportionally compared to other classes. If you're doing less single target and everyone's getting a flat amount of damage from this volcanic plume, that damage is going to be a higher percentile for you on single target than it is going to be for, say, something like a rogue. So if you're doing, 3k DPS single target and a rogue is doing 5k, and you both gain 1k DPS from the plumage, you'll move from 3 to 4, he'll move from 5 to 6, and the damage differential isn't that high. So this is a pack I mess up on. I'm kind of thinking I'm on live servers for some reason, and I start hitting Malefic Rapture instead of Sow the Seeds. So my damage here definitely could have been a lot higher, but I'm still bursting 30k DPS, messing up and playing my rotation incorrectly, so I'm a bit of an idiot, but Warlock still does good burst AoE with Malefic Rapture. But later on, I do the 2-minute burst correctly. I remember that I'm playing Sow the Seeds build and not on live servers, and you'll see the kind of AoE potential that Affliction Warlock does actually have. So here we have just a sustained 4-pack doing the standard stuff, and you can see, without any buffs, without any cooldowns, I'm pumping the AoE, damn. Affliction is very good. So, important to note on a pack like this, I'm not really utilizing Siphon Life very much. I don't think it's worth the global. I think it's better if you have shards just to spend it on doing that AoE rotation with Seed of Corruption and maintaining your agonies. On 3 targets, probably would be siphoning. On 4, if they live long enough, I could see it being worth it as long as you're not shard capping. But overall, it felt very worthwhile to just sit there and spam seed just like I'm doing here. So I pop my Soul Rot. That's my 1 minute cooldown window where I get my haste and my crit. You can see me skyrocket up here once I press that. So very good 4 target cleave. I think you could easily be sustaining 20k DPS as a Warlock, no problem on 4 target. Now, we get to this single target encounter, nothing too interesting happens here. You can see I'm performing reasonably well. 5k single target, not too bad, just a little bit behind the rogue. And this moment here is something I want to focus on. I do my cooldowns correctly here. Bless, I'm not a total noob. And you're going to see some shit. Alright? Warlock is pretty gosh darn insane. So it's pre-casting my Dark Soul. The thing that I probably shouldn't have done here is cast my Soul Rot so early. I probably should have waited a little bit. But you're going to see some shit, okay? You're going to see the dam. And we're rising. And we're rising. And we're rising. And we're rising. Now, if I Soul Rotted a little bit later, I probably would have done a little bit more damage, but the pack didn't end up living very long. And if the pack lived a little bit longer, it definitely would have been worth delaying my Soul Satchel. But Warlock, if the mobs are stacked and you're ready to go, when you do your DPS, it looks nice. It's the good stuff. And yes, on live, Warlock can do some respectable 4 to 5 target cleave if you have the time to set up your Seed, your Agonies, 5 Siphon Laves, your Unstable Affliction, your Haunt, your Dark Soul, your everything. If you can use everything on 5 to 6 mobs right now on live as Affliction, and you have the time to set up that damage, you can do some respectable things. However, you can't do it very quickly. It takes a long time to set up those dots, and you saw in that window there, I was able to burst close to 40k DPS on 5 targets in like 6-7 seconds. It didn't take me very long to ramp, which is really important. And if I took even longer and the pack would live longer, I would be able to do even more damage because I would have taken longer to ramp, get more agonies, use my Soul Rot later, things of that nature. So I'm just going to skip a little bit through this boss. I think people have seen Mistcaller enough. My single target at the end was around 5.1k. Wasn't excellent, wasn't awful. Moving forward, we fight this mini boss solo. Very easy stuff. You know, doing decent single target damage. We actually beat the rogue there. And then we're moving on to a 2 target pull. Do the standard stuff. Get my Seed of Corruptions out there. Get some pre-seeds before the mobs end up stacking up. Mobs are getting close, spending some agonies so I have time to get my stuff together. Pressing my Soul Rot, getting my buttons out there, sitting down, spamming the seeds, doing the deed. So this really isn't that big of a pull. It's about 5-6 targets once all the small ads die, which they die very quickly with the DH and the Rogue in the group, and a Warlock. So the mobs die fairly quickly, and I'm still able to do a ton of DPS. If these mobs lived longer and I was able to ramp and prep my DPS more, I would have done even more damage. So it's like Warlock is at a state where it's able to not only do a lot of DPS to mobs that die quickly, it's also able to choose to wait longer on those mobs that are going to be living a longer period of time and do even more because you're able to get that ramp out. So after that pack, we're just moving on to a very standard 4 target pull, and again, I don't have my 1 minute cooldowns up, so I'm not doing that insane DPS, but it's still pretty good sustain. Like, I'm not using anything here. I'm not using any cooldowns. The mobs die before I'm able to really get my damage rolling. So if you're kind of, newer to Warlock and you don't really understand what I mean by before I'm able to get my damage rolling, by the time I have my UA, my agonies out, the mobs are already going to be dead very shortly from right now. Everyone's sort of ramping. But I have a ton of shards. I have 4 soul shards, and there's no way I'm going to be able to spend all of my soul shards on this pack before they die. So I'm not actually able to get all of my DPS off before this pack is over. If this pack lived longer, I would just do more and more and more and more damage. Eventually I would plateau, but you can see if I was able to sit here and keep spamming Seed of Corruption at this point, I probably could sustain around 13 to 15k DPS on 4 targets without using cooldowns, which is excellent considering how powerful Warlock CDs are. So here, again, I didn't realize the tank was going to double pull, but doing the same sort of thing, prepping my damage, getting the single target out, the AoE damage out with my seeds, getting my Decaying Soul Satchel Legendary rolling, being quick about it, being quick about getting my damage out there, because these mobs don't live very long. Yes, I could have waited to Soul Rot a little bit later if I realized that we were double pulling, but in this key, again, it was the first one that I ran, and my mindset was I want to get my damage out quickly rather than being super optimal, because I don't really know how long packs are going to live on a 15 fortified in the new season. So you can see there, very respectable damage, only using my 1 minute cooldowns. If I have my 2 minutes, that damage just gets even more nutty, and you'll see that at the end of this boss here. So we pulled some trash into the boss. I don't think I play it particularly well. I think it would have been much better if I just Rapture spammed rather than pressing Seed of Corruption, just because of the way that the mobs stacked up. Affliction is very dependent on mobs being close-knit together if you're using Seed of Corruption spam. If they're not, then Malefic Rapture is just going to perform better. So don't think I play this part particularly well, but it's still not the end of the world. It was still decent. And I just want to kind of move on to the edges of the dungeon to show some of the AoE potential that Aff has if you're able to pull a lot of mobs together. So this is a 2-pack being pulled together. I have my 2 minutes up. I have all my CDs ready to go. And Warlock. Aff's very good at this sort of stuff, and you don't really fall off. You're not a class where you pull this stuff and you're going to start falling down on the meter. You're just going to keep going up and up and up and up and up and up. And hell yeah, brother. Not a lot of classes can do that. Fire Mage is very limited in its combustion and requires mobs to be stacked outside of that because of Flame Patch. Boomkin was a spec that was very good at sustained AoE like this, but it wasn't able to pull near the numbers Warlock is without having cooldowns available to it. And a class like Ellie Shaman, while being very good on AoE, does require, again, the mobs to be stacked for those Earthquake DPS. So you can see here, Warlock, you know, I do 11k DPS in this key. Like I said, Volcanic Plume was about 1,000 of that. Performs very well. It's a solid spec. And I really didn't, you know, this is my first time playing the spec on PTR. Nothing crazy. Yes, I am fairly good at playing Warlock, but there was room for improvement. And overall, I felt like Warlock was pretty solid in the key. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this commentary. Hopefully you can see some of the power that Warlock's able to put out. And I think in even higher keystones, Warlock could perform even better. I'm curious about Destro, curious about Demonology. I'll probably be trying out those specs a little bit in keys as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I will talk to you guys next time.